In this video, we will show you how to replace your front outer tie rod end on this Kia Forte Koup. This is part of your steering and suspension located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground and the suspension's hanging. To remove the wheel, we're going to remove all 5 of our 21mm lug nuts, and then we can get the wheel off of here. Now with the wheel out of the way, we have a clear view of our outer tie rod end. Now in between your outer tie rod end and your inner tie rod end, you're going to find that you have a jam nut. To be able to loosen this, we want to hold the outer tie rod end and use a 22mm to turn this towards the inner tie rod end. We'll hold the tie rod end with a 21, 22 for the jam nut, turn that clockwise. Once you have movement from this area, we'll be making our way to our brake caliper. Now for the caliper, the first thing we need to do here is carefully push back our caliper piston, which is located inside this area. To do this, you can use a small pry bar. We'll use that pry bar directly inside of this port and pry up against the brake pad or the brake rotor, being careful not to cause any damage. We need to push that piston in. At this point, you can see that we do have movement from the caliper. Let's pause out here and make our way along the backside to remove our 2 caliper bracket bolts. Along the backside of the caliper, we'll be using a 17mm to remove each of these bolts. We'll start with the top one. Go ahead and remove that. A quick inspection, start it back in a couple threads. With that started in a couple threads, we'll continue on to fully removing the lower bolt as well. Now we'll take hold of the caliper, carefully remove it from the area. A quick inspection of the brake pads and the caliper itself. Once you confirm that looks good, go ahead and hang it aside, putting no pressure on the flex hose. Swing this along to the front and out of our way. With the caliper out of the way, we can start dislodging the outer tie rod end from the steering knuckle. This is typically held in place with a locking cotter pin. For that, you do want to remove the cotter pin, and it's always a good idea to replace it. You can use some cutters for this or whatever you might happen to have. Just set that aside for recycling. Use a 17mm to remove the mounting nut. A quick inspection and start it back on there, just a couple threads. Once you do have that loose, it's always a good idea to apply a little bit of penetrant in the area where the tie rod end stud goes through that steering knuckle. After you've done so, it's time to separate the outer tie rod end from the steering knuckle. To do this, lightly tap on the steering knuckle itself, causing vibration. The tie rod end should come down, and the nut will hold it from falling down and potentially hurting you. Continuing from here, we're going to have to unscrew the outer tie rod end from the inner tie rod end. To do this, we'll be turning this counterclockwise, and while we're turning it counterclockwise, we're going to count the amount of turns it takes to remove it from the inner tie rod end. You can tell that we're starting with the tie rod end starting face up, so we'll come around counterclockwise like I said. There's 1 turn, 2 turns, and so on. I had approximately 12 turns. Your results may vary. Go ahead and write that number down. There it is, friend. We'll coat the threads with some anti-seize and continue on with our jam nut. Bring this about halfway down the threaded portion there. Now it's time to install our outer tie rod end. We'll start this on by hand. Once you do have it started on, you need to reinstall it the same amount of turns as it had taken to remove it originally. 1, 2, and so on. There we are. Now we'll take this, bring it over to where it connects onto that steering knuckle, pivot things as necessary so you can re-secure this together. We'll continue on with our outer tie rod end mounting nut. Just start that on. With that started on, snug it up and then torque it to 25 foot-pounds. Once you have that torqued, the next thing you need to do is pay attention to the slots that are on the mounting nut in comparison to the hole that goes through the tie rod stud. We need to make sure they're aligned so we can put the locking cotter pin through. If it's not properly aligned, continue tightening the mounting nut until the very next slot is. After that, continue on with that locking cotter pin. Just make sure we pin this over so there's no way this nut can loosen up on us while we're driving down the road. Let's make our way to our jam nut. We'll turn this counterclockwise so it bottoms out against your outer tie rod end. Now we're going to hold on to the outer tie rod end with a 21mm wrench while tightening the jam nut with a 22mm wrench. Make sure that's nice and tight. Now it's time to reinstall our brake caliper. We'll get this aligned. Start in each of our two 17mm headed mounting bolts, snug them up, and then torque those to 70 foot-pounds. Use some blue thread locker on these. One last quick inspection in this area, and we can reinstall our wheel. We'll start on all of our 21mm lug nuts and bottom them out. With the wheel back on the ground, we'll be torquing each of our 21mm lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay, friend, we've got the vehicle back together. At this point, you want to go ahead and pump up that brake pedal, take your vehicle for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.